5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the after show for the MDD debate with Inspiring Philosophy or Michael Jones versus True Islam UK, and his name was I need to remember Tahir Nasser. Okay, and he's a doctor in the UK, like a medical doctor. Anyways, I love the debate tonight, so I hope you all were able to watch it and enjoy the show that we just saw. It looks like James is doing some closeout notes, so they haven't actually ended their stream over there. So we'll bring everybody up on stage and we'll get to it. Inspiring Philosophy made a note. He might, like in the comments earlier, maybe come back. I don't know if he will. Probably not. We're not going to continue with the heated discussion, Edith. Okay. We were having a debate about historicity, guys. Like what you can know is true. So we'll just go around and do first thoughts. I can hear background noise from you, Dr. J. Yeah. Okay. So I think Tahir went first. So what were our first thoughts on Tahir tonight? And we'll start with Max. What did you think?
I liked his style. It was very cordial, it's always a good thing that doesn't turn into a screaming match. And he did bring up some good points, although I already know going into this that he's wrong. But he argued some points very well, and we can get into the details later. But
it's how you know he was wrong.
Oh. We can talk about that later.
Well, we get to it. Yeah, I got it separated by, I think, the different claims, or at least I did the best I could to separate it by the different claims. But yeah, like I'd love to know how you know he's wrong. Anyways, let's toss it to Dr. J. What were your thoughts on Tahir tonight?
I thought he did a great job. I thought he has a super tough position to defend, and I thought he's articulate, did well. I assume he's done debates or some kind of things like this before. So props to him. I think he took a tough thing to argue, and he did just fine.
I think they were very, very good at like challenging all the points he both made at each side. Mm-hmm. And Tahir had to challenge the response. Like he was actively listening and hearing and responding. I'd love that. That was very good. And let's toss it over to Issa. What did you think of Dr. Nasser?
It's probably like Nasser. It could be. He's Desi, so it might be Nasir. I'm going to be honest. The accent makes you sound really smart. When you have a posh British accent, you sound really smart. When you talk like this, you're like, everything I say is true. There's nothing that I could say that's wrong. I'm like a professor from Cambridge. You know, when you have that accent, it's a great boon. But just joking. But it's kind of true. But I think what he did was he laid out the Ahmadi position very well. And it's very hard for the Ahmadi community. So they have to be really well versed on this. They have a lot of books on this. They've translated, the Quran. Like they've done a lot of work. The Ahmadiyya they're very big into intellectualism. And I know a lot of Ahmadiyya folks, being like a South Asian person, it's part of the community. So, a lot of folks, they're doctors and lawyers and engineers, and they're high-level academics. I think he laid out his arguments well. He knew exactly where he was going with it. He said the talking points. He's very clear about it. But again, I'm going to agree with Dr. J. It is an extremely hard position because this is the common consensus of historians. If you don't take the mythicist position and you believe that Jesus is real, it's a very difficult position to argue. And it's also hard to argue from like a Muslim position because Muslims will argue that Jesus was never crucified. You're like your standard Sunnis, I would say. And I would say probably Shias too, but definitely your standard Sunni narrative, which is majority of the Muslim community, to be like, this is ridiculous. You can't make this position. This is not going to work. So it was hard. It's a very, very hard position to argue with the standard that we have. So.
Yeah, Pedro HM makes a point. Hindu Jesus, seriously? Yeah, you never heard that story? I heard that like as a teenager when my dad used to always study these different claims. There's like three different narratives. There's like Jesus survived, went to India, and died in Kashmir. Jesus survived and went to America and taught the Native Americans, right? And then you got the things. That's where Mormonism come from. Jesus died, but had a kid, and that was the other person that Jesus said when they asked Jesus, I guess, who should we save, and they said pick him. Supposedly, to some people, that was Jesus' son to Mary Magdalene, and that kid went to Europe, and there's books written about that, like fiction books.
Da Vinci Code. Da Vinci Code. Dan Brown's argument is that.
There's one more that talks about the years between his childhood and the age of 30, that
The lost
he went
years.
to India at that time. Yes.
Oh,
That's correct.
yes, I
Lost
remember
years
that.
of Christ.
Or
South Asia is a big place.
he went to
So,
go learn their philosophy and meditation
Yes,
and stuff,
and then came back.
and brought that back. Yeah, I've read stories where Paul was actually educated as a Stoic, and that's where that influence came from Paul, from Stoicism too. So there's all
I
these
agree.
external stories that are interesting. I love them actually. Like, to me, it's like fan fiction. It's like,
You know what's cool? It sounds like your dad is a New Ager, to be honest. It's so funny, even though he's
My dad?
atheist, because that's what New Agers do. New Agers are really, really big into like learning philosophy
yeah.
and learning different religions. So, like, if you told me that your dad was into this, I would have totally believed he would be a New Ager. You know what I mean? Like going to all those conferences and stuff with aura photography. But the thing is, the point is, like, there's also the Notovich Chronicles. I had put that in the chat where it was like said that there, in the Buddhist texts, there was a person named Isa, like how my name is spelled. Isa was found, he went and became like a practitioner in South Asia. So like there's a lot of stories about this. It's kind of cool.
The way these stories are usually handled in like more traditional Christian community is like you just learn enough about it to figure out why it's wrong, and then that's it. That's pretty much
But
it.
some of them are interesting. I remember one about like a giant Jesus after the resurrection, and also a giant talking cross, or something like very crazy like that. And
Yeah.
I don't know, it's interesting.
So, like, if people didn't watch the pre-show, we spent a lot of time talking about what Ahmadis Muslims are. They're considered heretical by the broader Sunni community, which makes up 90% of Muslims. So, if you want to learn more about where Tahir is coming from when it comes to these type of beliefs with Jesus and all these other type of claims, and they're like come again, like Messiah sort of thing, where basically Jesus was born again as their first caliphate, I think it was, or something like that is their claim. You can go watch the pre-show and go find all that stuff out. I think there's tons of stuff in there you'll all enjoy. But let's go around the table and talk about Mike Jones, Inspiring Philosophy. And we'll just go the same order we did last time with Max.
He did excellent. I think he argued everything he needed to. I generally don't like it, but I think in this case, his appeal to like basic medicine, because if you follow the Christian doctrine, then he was fully human. So medicine would still apply to Jesus. So I think in this case, I was like, that's a very good point. And I would generally wouldn't give it to. It's like, okay, we're talking theology. It's okay if we go to science. But in this case, I think they intersected in a good spot. And he did great.
I think they both made those arguments. Like, Tahir made the argument that it was impossible to die and come back to life. As a medical doctor, that's what we know. So it makes more sense that he survived because people saw him after he thought he died. Where Michael Jones was making sort of the other claim where, like, no, like, they did all this shit to him and he was up there for 6 hours, where they have a conflict over that. Like, one group thinks it's 4 hours, the other group thinks it's 6 hours. and so he died. Like they stabbed him, and then they had the conflict about, and we'll go over all that stuff. And I got prompts for all that stuff, but I thought that was interesting. They both sort of had, it wasn't like one side just had the voice, but they both went back and forth. But go ahead.
My honest opinion on that is like you're removing the best part. Like the important thing about Jesus is that he was God and he died and came back to life. It's like, no, that kind of doesn't work. Why do you remove the miracle? That baffled me. It's like, okay.
Yeah. We'll toss it to Dr. J. What did you think about? I had a misspelling here. So
I think he did really well. I think he, once again, does this kind of thing all the time and was well prepared. And just normal people that study the Bible would not be ready for all these different subjects. It's like really clear he's debated this particular subject like a million times, and so I thought he did a nice job.
Well, I noticed something. I don't know if you guys noticed. Well, you probably didn't because you didn't make this short that I did for the pre-show. Another thing, go watch the pre-show. I did a short video of Tahir, and that came from the video that Michael Jones used for his debate. He showed a screenshot of his crucifixion argument. So he did have an argument already on YouTube about that position, and it's a pretty common position between the Ahmadi Muslims of these claims. So
Ahmadiyya.
Ahmadiyya, whatever.
Yeah. No problem.
I got closer.
It's hard. It's very hard. Trust me, as an American, like we'd said this before, these Arabic words are really hard. Urdu, all of this stuff, it's difficult. So it's no big deal.
Obviously it is. But go ahead with Michael Jones.
I'm just playing with you, man. It's not a big deal. I'm having a good time.
I can't speak English right, so you're picking on my Arabic.
Oh my god. So what I would say is Mike Jones is solid. He's a solid debater, and I was very impressed with his engagement of the Ahmadi, and as well as Tahir was very much into what the argument that was made by Mike Jones. So his own interlocutor said that it was solid. So I definitely think it's important that you know your interlocutor's position. You have to steelman it. You have to understand where it's coming from. And this is a very difficult position because also it's very, very South Asian, like I said before. A lot of this stuff is intertwined within the South Asian culture. So you kind of need to engage the South Asian milieu to engage this this narrative. So I think Mike Jones, he's solid, he's good, he's a very good debater. He may have known Nabil Qureshi too, I'm not sure. Nabil Qureshi is a very famous Christian who was from an Ahmadiyya background and was actually a very devout Ahmadi and became a Christian. He was best friends with Dr. Wood. So that's an interesting thing. So that may be a part of how he became versed on this too.
Thank you. Now I want to get into the meat. I got a lot of prompts. I thought they covered a lot. So they spent some time talking about the swoon theory, which I think is the main point under contention. So the basic idea is that Jesus didn't actually die. He sort of passed out, and they provided herbal remedies that helped to cure his wounds. And so maybe, what did you think about that argument, Max?
It's a weird argument. I don't know why.
Why is it weird? Is it become from your traditional knowledge of Christianity?
Yes.
Have you never heard this before? Is that why?
No, I've heard of it before, but not that long ago. But it also sounds weird to me because one thing I noticed on the debate is that I'm not going to pronounce his name. I'm going to say the Muslim. Sorry. I'm sorry, I can't. Tahir. Okay, sorry. Tahir, he couldn't fully argue from the point of view of the Christians. I mean, if you're going to argue Christian theology, the least you can do is abide by kind of like their rules.
Why? He wasn't arguing Christian theology. He was arguing his theology.
Yes, but his theology in the case of like Muslims and Christians intersect. So I don't understand why people who are
Okay.
Muslim feel the need to tell the Christians what their theology should be. That's the point I see like a disconnect. Because
Well, they
me as
think-
an atheist, when I talk to everyone, I take their beliefs as they are.
Yeah.
So I don't put any tint on them. I judge them on what they're telling me, but not on what I think. It's kind of like a big straw man.
But they're
But I
not
don't
doing
think.
that. So they're saying this is our interpretation of your text, and this is how it conforms with our theology, and this is how you're supposed to interpret it. So even within Christianity itself, there is conflicts within interpretation of the Christian text. So if you're trying, so it's conflicting worldviews, like two worldviews coming head to head, right? So either only one of them could be right, or they could both be wrong, right? So I'm of the opinion they're both wrong. So just because they're in tension, the two worldviews are in tension, doesn't mean that one of them's not right. So if you have conflicting worldviews, that's what happens. No, you're interpreting it incorrectly. No, you are. So then the question becomes is like, well, which side is more convincing in the interpretation? So what would you say a point in favor of the swoon theory being true? And I'm going to kick it down to Issa. What would you think a point in favor of the swoon theory being true versus Jesus dying and coming back from death, which is a Christian claim?
I think the argument that could work with this type of situation is we have no evidence of, like, I guess we could say historical evidence of someone dying and coming back to life. So it is easier for one to believe that a person survived their wounds and was able to come back because, you can't die and come back. So that could work on, like, I guess, a naturalistic theory position. That I think that's the argument that most people would make for it.
Yeah, I think that's the argument Dr. Nasir made, was that it's medically impossible to die and come back from life. And I think he had other theological arguments, but maybe we get into those later, that said that it's more of a miracle that God would save him from such grievous injuries and heal his feet if he was staked to the cross by his feet and hands. To actually heal those wounds, then it would be to allow him to die and come back. And the other, well, I'll kick it back to Dr. J. I'll kick it down. Like there was another argument I think he made, maybe you remember this, about how can you ever collect evidence that somebody actually died and came back to life, went to hell or heaven, came back.
Yeah, I mean, it is difficult, right? Like, just you can always just say, well, they weren't really dead, right? So it's difficult. So it was historical. So I guess I would say it's really, really difficult. I'm not sure what else you want me to say about it. I think you can say it can't be done, and then just say, okay, well, cool. I guess it's just, then you reject that it could ever be done. Well, I don't know. That doesn't seem possible. And then you say, well, if someone was like clinically dead and their body got revived, even if you're like totally, didn't believe in any kind of religion, you could say, oh, well, they were dead and they came back because, the everything got revived again or whatever, right? So is that possible? It's difficult, because if you just say, well, you could never prove it can't be, then I guess you win.
Yeah. And it looks like the stream actually ended now. So welcome everybody. If you have any questions for the panelists, feel free to tag at Matters Now, and me or Max will start. We'll ask the panel those questions when they come to it. We're talking about the validity of the swoon theory now, which was, I think, the main point under contention is whether Jesus actually died or not. Did he pass out and recover over 3 days or 2 days and 3 nights and 2 days or whatever? It'd be 2 nights and 3 days. Okay. I think was their main point of contention there. So tag me if you have any questions for the panel. We went around and talked about, I think all of us, since you didn't hear it, thought that both of the people did very well. Dr. Nasir did well, and Michael Jones did very well in the debate tonight. We haven't given us whether we said who we thought won yet, but I think it sounds like people are leaning one way over the other. But if you want to offer more insight, because I sort of like pigeonholed right into that, what did you think about the swoon theory argument there, Dr. J?
I mean, I understand why people make it. I mean, if you're going to say, well, it just makes sense that, we've never seen anyone resurrected before. Therefore, if we hear a story about it, I'm going to not think that's what happened. So I want to come up with another explanation, which, you'd have to already accept that even the existence of Jesus is like legit. So you say, okay, well, I think that's, legitimate enough to believe that exists. So what's the story about? Oh, well, maybe it means the swoon, the swoon theory is what it is. I don't even think secular scholarship particularly takes this theory anymore. I don't know how many people take this theory anymore outside of this guy needed it kind of for his theology, right? But I think that's about it. I think he's one of I think it's a minority view now, if my understanding is correct.
Yeah, it's like there's 25 million, I think, of his group in the world, but I'm not sure. Well, it has to be like Mormons. Well, no, you could believe he died, was resurrected, and went to India. Like, I think Michael Jones brought that up. Like, okay, maybe he did go to India instead of go to heaven. So, or maybe he did go to America, like, instead of heaven. But most, I think the modern, like, Christian theology is, or like historical Christian theology is that he died, resurrected, spent a few days with his people, and then went to heaven, right? Like, he disappeared.
So isn't it true that this guy accepts miracles? Like, if he's Muslim, he would accept some kind. There's a God, there's miracles of some type. It's just that he seems like he kind of acted like, obviously this miracle's stupid, but it seems like he believed in other ones. Maybe. I mean, Issa might be able to explain. Maybe am I correct on that? He does believe.
You are correct. You're correct, of course. Yeah, I think that. This is something that I think we do in religion, where we're kind of defend our own positions and defend our own support spaces, and we're not actually critical. Well, like, we're not critical of our own claims, but we're critical of others' claims that don't jive with where we're at. So yeah, there's totally lots of miracles. The miracle of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad. Mirza Ghulam Ahmad has tons of miracles. Who is like, who's considered prophetic, considered a sheikh. He's considered this kind of person of wisdom. He has kind of miraculous things when he debates. I wish we could have more conversation on the Ahmadiyya community in and of itself. It's really fascinating. But yeah,
Pre-show, go watch it, people. We have 40 minutes.
Yes, that exactly as Ozian said, Brother Ozian said. I agree with what you said, Dr. J. I definitely think it's true. You're like, even how these religions come to be, the scripture itself, the prophetic narrative, it's miraculous. So yes, I would agree with you.
Hey, welcome Grayson from Base Theory, because they're based and not pseudoscience, I guess. Whatever your tagline is. I'm sorry I missed your 1,000 sub episode, but I'm sick. I still am. They don't know what's wrong with my foot. I thought it was one thing. She's saying no, it's not that. Take this medicine. Hopefully it goes away. Anyways, did you watch the debate tonight?
Well, I hope you start feeling better soon, Ozian. But yeah, I caught the openings and the rebuttals, and I had to go and do something else during the open dialogue, so I missed most of that in the questioning. But this was my first exposure to what did you say that the Ahmadiyya? Yeah, this is my first exposure to these arguments, and I was just like fascinated. I've never heard of especially I was interested in the guy's opening when he brought up this Hindu text of Jesus in 78 AD, which I went down that rabbit hole on that. I read up on it and I was disappointed to learn that it was a fake, because I really wanted to believe that, because it was super cool. Like, I mean, Jesus becoming some guru in the Himalayan mountains. I mean, it sounds freaking cool, and I
They have
really
the
want that
grave
to be true.
site. What do you mean
Huh?
it's fake? They have their grave. They have a
Okay, sure,
tomb.
Ozian.
They have the feet there with little holes in them. It can't be fake.
So
No, I'm kidding.
I looked at the text that it's from, and it's like from the 1700s. So I was like, my disappointment was immeasurable. I really did want to believe, but unfortunately, it was like a very quick Google that, yeah, that has absolutely no historical support. And so I was like surprised that this guy, who seemed like a medical doctor, he talked in a British accent. So I was much more predisposed to believe him. And he was decently articulate, you know. And so I wanted to believe what he was saying, but then just like literally just like a 5 minute on fact checking him just showed that he was like completely full of it. So I was disappointed.
Well, what did you think of his swoon theory? Let's pretend, hypothetically, that Jesus was crucified, and the Bible says like people survived crucifixion, and there's lots of historical documentation that shows that a certain percentage of people survived the 6 hour like thing, and if they did, they were given medical care or whatnot to try to help them. But even most of those people still died. So, what do you think of his swoon theory argument versus?
I don't, you know, maybe there's something I'm missing about it, but I don't understand why the Roman authorities would help out in that. I mean, like, to my understanding, the Roman authorities just hang you up on the crucifix till you're dead. It's not like, oh, you survived 8 hours. We have to take you down now and treat you medically. I don't know if I've never heard of that. So,
What happened in the Bible too, right? Like they took 3 of the people down and one of them survived. So, and if you look at his, I read a book as a teenager about the crucifixion and the chances of surviving, but it was from an atheistic perspective. So they think that he just never died, that that's why they thought he resurrected. He was just survived, but they don't think there's any miracles involved in this story. I don't believe the outcome, but they went through the historical records that no, they would, like, people would survive. Maybe it was their family that would give them medical care, but it was like a 6 hour punishment. And the conflict in this one, like the Ahmadiyas believe it was 4 hours, where the Christians believe it was 6 hours that he was crucified for. And I just want to thank Oliver Catwell for becoming a channel member. Thank you so much, Oliver, for that. So if you think about it, so the swoon theory was like, oh, you got blood loss, you got all this trauma, and so would it make more sense that the reason why people saw you alive is because you actually survived the event versus coming back from the dead?
hmm. So I was just reading up on Roman crucifixion to see if there was like non-biblical support that they would just say, "Oh, well, now you've gotten past the allotted punishment time, so now we have to take you down."
Did you find anything?
It says there is an ancient record of one person who survived a crucifixion that was intended to be lethal but was interrupted. Um,
Well, maybe it depend on the punishment, like if it was until you died or if it was for a specific period of time. I think they had 2 forms of crucifixion. So
There was like a non-lethal crucifixion that was not meant to obviously kill you, and then there was like a lethal crucifixion, which I'm pretty sure that they would just leave you up there for like until you're dead and then throw you in an unmarked pit. Like, I don't think that they're going to be taking you down and saying, okay, well, now you've suffered, so now we forgive all that about, you know, rebelling against the empire and claiming you're the king of the Jews. Well, that's all in the past now. You did your 6 hours. We'll take you down. We'll treat you. And, you know, I just don't know. It seems a little far-fetched for me to, like, think of that as historically plausible.
Almost everybody died. It's just like there's like stories in the United States even where they would hang people as a death penalty. If they survived, they were let go because it's like an act of God intervened to allow you to survive. So if God's going to intervene, who are we as the court? And we only sentenced you to die once. We did the thing. You didn't die. Like, so,
Yeah.
okay.
I don't know. It seems like maybe that would have been reflected in the Roman historical record.
But did you just say there was a non-lethal form and a lethal form?
Yeah, but Jesus, they were aiming for the lethal form on that one.
Yeah, I agree. That's why they beat him and all that stuff. So,
As anyone familiar with like Apologia? He's got his like minimal witnesses theory explaining it. I think that's a pretty compelling one.
yeah, he popped into the chat there and he said he agreed with Michael Jones. So I think it was on Twitter because he accepts it. He crucified, but he thinks Jesus died, just wasn't resurrected. So
I mean, the vast majority of the field, I mean, would agree with would agree that Jesus was died on the cross. So
yeah, so like the one major thing they kept going on about was Jonah's story, and I am not an expert. Do we have any experts on Jonah's story here? Anybody?
Okay. So, Jonah and the whale, right? So Jonah goes to Nineveh. God tells him to go to Nineveh. When he's supposed to go to Nineveh, he doesn't. He goes away, takes a ship going the opposite direction. While he's going the opposite direction, there's a storm and he gets swallowed by a big fish. And then he gets in the belly of the big fish for 3 days. So, Jonah and the whale, big fish. Apparently, this guy has a novel theory on what this animal was. He gets spit out at some point, and then Jonah realizes, okay, I shouldn't go against God. Then he goes to Nineveh, and then he preaches to them, and so on and so forth. There's more to the story after that, but that's essentially the story of Jonah and the whale, or Jonah and the big fish, or Jonah and the Leviathan, or whatever way you want to take that. And so the thing is, Jesus references the story, right? And so the way I've always understood it is because of the 3 days. And this guy's like, well, I mean, that's not a very good way to understand this prophecy. He's not referencing time, right? He's also referencing that, Jonah didn't die. So Jesus didn't die. It's like, oh my goodness. If you just look at the way the New Testament quotes the Old Testament, there is so much scholarship on that because it is just really hard to tell sometimes why in the world they even quote those Old Testament passages. So for him to be so confident that the time element isn't it, and his has to be it. It's just like there's just no way. I mean, I just don't see how he could be positive his way is the right way. Maybe it's right, but I mean, I did not agree. He should have a level of confidence on that.
Do you mind if I piggyback off of that? Is that cool? Yeah. Cool. So I'm going to agree with Dr. J. I think it's difficult. What is going on here is very difficult because we're using Ahmadiyya theology, which makes it very hard. It's hard to come to in a debate where nobody really knows your theology, and you have like an hour, you have maybe 3 hours to kind of convey what this theology is. And then you have to disprove the common narrative that already exists. How do you do that? I don't know how. And that's the difficulty with this debate. It's like you're saying, well, look at this story. My interpretation of the story is right. And, the common knowledge of this story is wrong, And you're saying, well, I'm going to use Christian sources, but I'm not going to follow all the way through with the Christian sources, is what Max was hinting at. Max is like, look, there's this kind of common thread of what the narrative is. How are you going to come in and say, well, I'm going to quote your sources, but I'm going to do it my way, and then expect everybody else to kind of get it too? That's just not going to sell. You have to do a lot of work to do that. And that's what I think is the biggest difficulty in this particular debate. And I would say with the Jonah story, I mean, there are different, like the Jewish interpretation is very different than both the Christian and the Ahmadiyya position. So like which position's right? I guess it's up to the interpreter and how they view it. And I think Dr. J made a really interesting argument. He said, look, Christians are quoting the Hebrew scriptures, and they're using it to look into this prophecy. And they may not look like they would even at first sight fit, but when you do deeper investigation, they do. So if you're going to engage these things, you have to know the Christian theology in engaging this. And I think that was important for Dr. Tahir to do, or Dr. Nasser to do, was to kind of go in and say, I need to know the way that Christians think about this too, instead of just the way the Ahmadiyas interpret the text. I think that would have helped the engagement personally with this story.
Really quick, just on that, the one historical example of somebody surviving crucifixion was because Josephus saw like 3 former acquaintances of his being crucified, and he went to Titus personally and begged him to take them down. And like Josephus was recording this himself and saying that like uh, Titus immediately commanded them to be taken off of the cross, and then they were treated medically. And even then, 2 out of the 3 of them died. So it doesn't seem like there's much. I don't know what the historical evidence is that they would have just taken them down after a certain period of time and treated them if they hadn't died yet. I don't know if there's any historical support of that.
So it was a Josephus claim, not a biblical claim from that. See, I was confused because I never really remembered that, but I hear a lot of tension from Michael Jones every time to hear it mentioned it. So like I'm not a biblical expert. So that you agree, Dr. J, that's not biblical. That's
That people
biblical,
survive the crucifixions. That's not in the Bible. No.
okay. So that's what Grayson brought up then. That makes more sense. And somebody asked about that, so they answered their question too. All right. I did have some questions with what's that?
I was just saying, I'm really fascinated by this. I guess, is this like a sect of Islam? This belief that Jesus went to India? I've never come across this before. Like in terms of like, this guy clearly is talking from like a set ideology that believes this. Like he had these made up textual supports. He brought up that guy that claimed to be the second coming or something at the end. I guess was the founder of this sect. I mean, this is
Mirza Ghulam Ahmed. It's
so
very South Asian.
This was like really fascinating stuff. I've not come across one of these guys before, so this is my first exposure.
It's like a Satya Sai Baba thing. Is this what it's like? Like, I think he's South Asian too.
Who was that?
Satya Sai Baba. Yeah. Satya Sai Baba.
Oh, is he? Oh,
he's dead now. He did magic tricks and stuff like that.
You're talking about Shirdi Sai Baba. The second, it's the second. Yeah, Satya Sai Baba. He's the reincarnation of Shirdi Sai Baba. Yeah, totally.
Robin Webster, $5 super chat. Thank you very much. The common practice was to leave the condemned person on the cross for days, allowing scavengers to attack the body. That was part of the punishment. Yeah,
it was like a humiliation.
Well, what was the 6 hours versus the 4 hour things then they were talking about, Dr. J? That I'm confused about that. Like,
I'm not sure what they were talking about. I mean, this isn't normally debated, right? Like, I don't normally have to defend this against anyone because most everybody recognizes that he died. It's just not. I mean, I learned about the swoon theory in school, but it was just like, this isn't really rejected. This isn't a popular one anymore. So we didn't even look into it that much. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it was like a faddish thing to learn, at least when I was a kid. So, Isa brought up for New Age people to learn this thing. So, because I learned about it from my dad.
What did you guys think about? Because I always hear this brought up about when they stabbed him, the water came out first, or before the blood or whatever, or water and blood came out, and then he was making the argument. As a medical doctor, it sounded like that a dead body, like the blood doesn't gush out because the heart's not beating. And like, then the other guy he quoted a doctor saying that it would rush out. And I don't know if that got resolved at some point in the debate. But what are you guys' thoughts on, like, does the blood come rushing out of a dead body or not?
I think that's the next one right here.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he admitted that there are Christian doctors that disagree with him. So he kind of just said, well, I think it wouldn't work that way, but others did. And then he tried to use this idea. He, pulled out the Strong's Concordance, which if you're a real scholar, no one uses the Strong's Concordance. And, tried to say that it would be parallel. And that's just like the worst use of a lexicon in the world. Okay. I mean, when you pull out a lexicon, you can't just look at the 3 meanings, decide which of the 3 you like, or like decide you're going to use part of one and part of another one. That doesn't work. It's like the word cool. It's like, is the cool, cool isn't awesome. Cool is the temperature. They have nothing to do with each other. Absolutely nothing to do with each other. And so his sort of use of the Strong's Concordance, which is like a super crappy, a lexicon, or you wouldn't even call it a lexicon. I just thought was like, ugh, yeah, that's rough. You can't be doing that.
Yeah. Share dear, really quick before you go on. I think most of the people on the panel will accept that Jesus was like a historical figure, even if it's just for the sake of the argument. We had that conversation before the show. We could have a conversation about mythicism too, but I think anyways, won't go into it. Go ahead, Issa.
Yeah, so we're going to grant in this argument of looking at this position, how does this work? I think that the point is why is this so important? It's because it's deeply rooted in Islamic tradition. The idea is that Jesus was not crucified, which basically means that Jesus didn't die. So this is the Ahmadiyas are going to hold on to this point. So even if Jesus, went on a cross, he wouldn't have died. And this is an important situation. So the traditional Muslim believes that there was someone, depending on the Muslim, because Islam is polylythic. There are multiple kinds of Muslims. There's an argument that someone, and this is kind of like what you would see in apocryphal texts, Dr. J knows what I'm talking about. And I think it's really cool that Dr. J brought up concordance. This is a big thing with religion. You need to know about like exegesis and concordance and understand the linguistic stuff. Seminary is there's a reason for seminary. You can't just say, hey, I'm a scholar of religion and you haven't done the work. Learning the language really helps. Learning Greek, understanding it. And Dr. J is right about what he said. Like just getting 3 interpretations of what a word is not enough. You need to do more work than that. And I think that's solid.
What was the contention on this interpretation? So
he was talking about how when they came out, something to do with being parallel, and therefore he was saying the text was demanding that the blood was squirting out so strongly that it was coming out parallel. It's just like there's just no way you could pull that out of the Strongs.
Well, I think maybe if it was pumping out of an artery or something, but they didn't. They stabbed him in the chest. But he said it would have happened when it initially went in, that it might have gushed out, or when they pulled it out, it would gush out.
Really quick question on this: when this happened, was Jesus still considered to be up on the cross? So like gravity could have just been responsible for this, or?
Well, it didn't gush
Yeah,
out.
he was stabbed on the cross. Yeah, they stabbed him while he was on the cross. So the one guy, the Christian guy, was arguing, well, it didn't gush out necessarily, just stuff come out. I think and the other guys, no, the word has to mean that it was just this flow, which was impossible because his heart wasn't beating, that would happen. So they started arguing over this word, and I was just saying that the guy, to provide an Islam perspective, was trying to get more out of this word that I think was legitimate.
Yeah, because if it was gushing out, that means his heart was pumping. So Jesus wasn't dead, because they were supposed to be checking to see if he's dead. But the account is that person testified that he was dead, right? The guard soldier that stabbed him said, "Yep, he's dead." Because the blood didn't come gushing out, so like Michael was trying to say, it's blood and water or whatever that came out. So maybe the lung got pierced too, so he's dead. If there's clear fluid coming out at the same time blood's coming out, you're probably dead. I don't know what type of herbal remedy you're going to give this dude in 0 friggin' 8 or
it's
38.
RPG logic. It's RPG logic. Do you know RPGs or video games? You can take an herb, you get bitten by a zombie like in Resident Evil. You take an herb and you get completely healed. It's video game logic. So you just do that and you get healed. You can take a motion.
I know we're talking about a zombie story now, but we don't have to bring the zombie references into it. Sorry, Dr. J, I'm just messing with you.
but you get it. It's a really interesting point. Is that if you use a video game logic, it does work. You're practically dead and you're dying, and then you drink a potion and everything is healed magically.
Well, it's God. God could just heal you too, right?
So what you're saying is that video games were prophesied in the Bible.
Totally. I'm saying that 100%. I'm
You don't want
dropping the mic
to. You
on that.
see the new conspiracy theories from flat earthers? They believe that there's ancient cell phones.
Well,
Atlantean theory's real, man. Okay, we're magical super beings
They have
who could
they
do
have
magic, you know, and
they
we
have
were
a
extremely
fossil.
evolved.
They have a fossil of an ancient cell phone. It doesn't matter it was for an art exhibit. No. That's an actual fossil. The government's lying to us. Anyways.
Anyway,
Off
I wanted
topic,
to
sorry.
hop in on the medical part. Yeah, Michael was arguing that Jesus was in shock, which pulls your blood to the core of your body because you are lacking blood.
Died from shock, right? Yeah.
Well, yeah, your heart is trying to keep pumping, so it vasoconstricts your blood to your extremities into your core, and that something about fluid pooling around the lungs, which was the water reference, was when they pierced him, that he had fluid built up around his lungs, which can happen, but generally with fluid built up, that's usually in response to a like septic, like when you have an infection, and you get the fluid buildup around your lungs with some kind of infection in your blood. So that was a little dodgy, but then Michael also mentioned something about clotting factors, and obviously when you don't have a lot of blood in your system, you don't have enough clotting factors. So it's kind of a weird thing, like your body is trying to hold on to the blood that it has, but then your adrenaline is kicking in, which kind of acts in reverse. And so, yeah, your body kind of goes into a in shock, obviously, but in a desperate try to like keep yourself alive. So, but yes, the dead bodies do not, because that, if it was a squirt, whatever the terminology was, that would necessitate a heart pumping under pressure.
It was based on his own personal interpretation that it was squirting. Well,
Yes.
not personal, but their sex interpretation that it was squirting to support their claim that Jesus never actually died, because that's what the Quran says, that Jesus never died. But most people that are Muslim don't believe Jesus was even crucified. So it's sort of like they believe he was crucified, just didn't die. And Oliver Catwell, thank you. I hopefully that you both sort of covered the same thing. It looks like Oliver used much more technical terms like super diaphragmatic, subparaphragmatic blood,
Yeah, it's
lymphatic
completely-
fluid,
It doesn't.
stuff I think I pronounced okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Anything else on medical perspectives? So my notes show. So basically, Tahir used his own medical expertise as a doctor. I think that really was good, right, for his claim. Like,
Yeah.
death is impossible. You can't come back from death. And we know that medically. People like, and he made another point, if you remember. He said sometimes, even today, people will get declared dead, but we don't have any tests to actually verify true brain death without killing the person, right? Without ripping their brain out to look. Oh yeah, you're dead. So we just like sort of assume they're dead, like based on other things like heart, brain activity, stuff like that. And we declare him dead. So that's why when people say, "Oh, the person had a near-death experience, came back to life," stuff like that, they never actually were truly clinically dead. They were medically dead, declared dead by the doctor, physician.
Correct.
So just to make that clear. So Tahir brings it up, like, well, I think it was like trauma care or intensive care or something like that, doctor. So he would have a lot of experience in these type of cases and probably did a lot of studying in that during his profession. And so that was strong evidence to say, and I agree that it's impossible for somebody to die and come back from death. So it'd have to be a supernatural claim. But why not? Why couldn't he have? Oh, because it's the Quran. So they cannot have him die because the Quran says he couldn't have died. So, anyways, I have a new prompt. Unless somebody else has something to say about
Um,
that.
Yeah, in 2022, I think that they did make a medical procedure that brought pigs back from life, but back from the dead. So
Really?
I don't think it even quite necessitates a supernatural miracle, but I mean, like, just in principle. I'm not saying that they had that medical technology back then, but like it says, at least like the pigs had been dead, they had cardiac arrest, and then
Were they cold? Were they frozen?
I don't think that they were frozen. I would have to read more about like their exact methodology. I just remember the headlines from like 2022, but it was like they were. I'm pretty sure like clinically dead for at least an hour, and then they had some sort of procedure. I'll need to get more details and get back to you, but I
Yeah.
think that there is at least in the realm of like technological possibility to do in
But
the
not
future,
in,
Usually it's they're
first century.
cold.
not in
Yeah.
the Iron Age.
Yeah.
Well, there's cases of people like drowning in ice cold water, and they get them out. And it's usually
Yes.
younger people who are healthier, and
Ice does a lot of things to help
yeah.
to slow down the metabolic rate of your body, and so it's much easier. If people have like fallen through a frozen lake or something like that, it's you're never supposed to consider them dead until they're warm, because
Um,
the cold can kind of act as a, like we keep stuff in the refrigerator, it kind of keeps things preserved, and there is
I
still a chance to revive them.
I think I've heard of cases like 45 minutes of people not breathing
Mhm.
because they were cold,
Mhm.
that they were able to revive them, but they're like healthy people, young people typically. But if there's any activity,
It was
like you
great.
get cell death really quickly, necrosis and all types of stuff that
And one thing we have to engage in this conversation is when we're talking about death, is this death according to a human perception, or is this death overall? Like this is the like what there's people who said, "Oh, I came back from dying," like Daniel Brinkley, who claims that a lightning bolt like hit the phone. I don't know if you're familiar with like new age stuff, like people who've had beyond life experiences, and they claim that they were medically dead, but then there was a resuscitation that brought them back. So that's a question too. It's like, is our human designation of medical death equitable to like ceasing of life? And I think that is a part of the conversation as well.
there's like a pathway in your brain. I'm not sure where it is. Like when that like dies, you're dead. There's as far as we know, there's no way to bring. Well, maybe there is a way now. I don't know, but
it sounds
uh,
like I'm trying to figure out what their controls were to like at what state of death these pigs were, but in terms of like how they brought them back, they like hooked them up to a machine that artificially like replaced their blood with like a new blood that had like additive like some sort of like drug component to it that was like in addition to normal blood. So like they replaced their circulating blood with like different material that apparently like suffused around their cells and reanimated activity. But I don't know to
So
like
besides having really modern fancy equipment,
but what did they
we're not
steal
going to
it?
be reviving anybody anytime soon.
Did when they removed the equipment? Did they have any activity? Because
I would assume so, but I haven't read that specifically. I'll hunt that answer down.
be
Yeah.
interesting. Because we know like they can keep somebody who's brain dead on life support, their blood pumping and all that stuff, and keep their cells from dying off. But
They did
it,
they
Yeah, as
did
long as
cool
respond,
down.
of course,
They did
intact.
cool down the animals to decrease their brain activity during the whole experiment. So
because there's
we're
lots of cases where people are brain dead, but the family doesn't want to take them off life support under some. I mean, because there's no way you can actually tell, as far as I know, except with- when they just scan the brain to see if there's any activity. But some people do come back from really deep comas, so there's always a chance. But if you're truly brain dead, you're done. But anyways, we'll move on. So the next prompt I got is biblical narratives and prophecies reflect on the use of biblical prophecies and Jesus' own words regarding his death and resurrection. So they spend a lot of time talking about this as
I just
arguments
wanted to pop
for
in
and
for the
against
medical
his
part, so
theory. Thank you,
I'll bow
Earl.
out again. Bye.
See you, Earl.
So this I thought was a little like I think Max was bringing up in the beginning about how Tahir was like interpreting the Bible the way he wanted to, not the way Christians wanted to. So that there's lots of passages in the Bible that says Jesus, well, I'll come back. And then like I want to ask about the Psalms thing, right? So there's when Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane, right? He's praying to God like, you've forsaken me, or something like that. But that's from his Psalms. And it wasn't the whole Psalms. And I think Michael Jones talked about that. Can you talk about that, Dr. J, if you're familiar?
I can't remember which one you're talking about, but trying to prove what happened in the New Testament based on prophecies in the Old Testament to me is a really difficult thing to do. Because if you read the Old Testament and read its prophecies, you would never guess what happened in the New Testament. Like you would never come up with the story of Jesus. Like absolutely, you never would, right? You would, even believers would say it was written in kind of a way that it wasn't just like, oh, there's going to be this guy, his name's going to be Jesus. He's going to, do this and this and this, right? Because everyone agrees that the prophecies about Jesus within Christianity, everyone agrees. Everyone is too big a word, but you know what I mean. In general, people agree that there's all these conflated prophecies of Jesus as what he's going to do the first time he comes back, and the people think he's going to come back again. And so these end up being conflated together. So they're very hard to super hard to parse out. And only in like retrospect can you even try to parse those out. So by trying to say, I'm looking at the Old Testament, of which if I would have read without the New Testament, I never would have come up with a story ever at all. And then I'm going to prove that your understanding of the New Testament, which seems to be fairly clear, is incorrect. It's just like not a great way to go about doing it. Just trying to use biblical prophecy to understand the New Testament, and rather than just trying to understand what the New Testament says is seems like a bad idea.
Do you mind if I know what the verse was? It's Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. You, Dr. J knows what that is. Elo, Eloi, lama sabachthani. It means like, oh Lord, why have you forsaken me? It's from Psalms 22. And that's the point. That there was a debate was on that particular verse. Like, what does that mean? And how do you understand what that verse is?
Well, because when the quote in the New Testament isn't the full Psalms 22, right?
Which happens all the time. There's quotes in the New Testament of the Old Testament that are like vague, or they're kind of Septuagint, or they're like a paraphrase of it. That happens all the time. There's times where it looks like they're quoting one part of the Old Testament and another part, and they put them together. So like that sort of thing happens all the time, and so there's a bunch of debate. And even when they're quoting it, sometimes it seems like they're quoting it in context, meaning like, I'm taking into the context of what was happening then, and I'm saying it was a prediction of what was happening now. But sometimes they quote the Old Testament. It seems to be just like this concept of forgiveness was in the Old Testament, and look, now we're forgiving now, and they're completely ignoring the context of the Old Testament when there just seems to be referencing it just as some sort of like, look, that's talking about the same subject.
Question on this. This line of, oh God, why have you forsaken me, or whatever, is that only in Mark, or how many of the Gospels is that in?
One.
Just Mark?
In the other, yes. In the other one, that's what I kept thinking throughout the debate. In the other one, and this, I know this because it's a common thing I bring up with the Christians to see what they say to me, right? But in the other gospel that tells the crucifixion and death, he says something very different. He says, forgive them, Father, they don't know what you're doing. I'm paraphrasing, I'm sorry, I don't mean to butcher the Bible. But he kind of says something like that. So there's two different verses about the same thing. I don't know why he picks only one of them. In the Christian theology, it doesn't matter because what the final words are kind of.
I think
really
that's just a very interesting thing to include as being dialogue that Jesus would say while on a cross, because it seems like, to my novice, uneducated biblically eyes, it just sounds like he's having like a real crisis moment of like, he had these expectations that he was gonna be the Messiah and everything, and now it looks like he's about to die. And so it's like a real like, why have you forsaken me? Like, it seems like a very genuine like human moment of like doubt. And so that's just really weird for like the biblical authors to have included that. I don't know how to read that really.
This happens all the time as far as like the character of Jesus is this constant, like he does all these very human things, very, very human things. And so, he's supposed to be God and human at the same time, right? I understand why people don't agree with that, but this is this tension that's always going on in the New Testament. There's just superhuman things that seem really odd, and then Jesus, of course, does miraculous things that are human. So that tension is going on all the time. So when he says, "Why are you not forsaking me?" There's tons of weird stuff going on there, right? Well, if Jesus is God, how can he be forsaken, right? You got the Trinity going on. So these kind of all these sort of magical, if you want to use that word, atheists usually like that word better because, but whatever, right? You have these miraculous, magical connections that are being made that are weird, right? So that particular one isn't any weirder than any of the other ones.
Yeah, and that was another argument. Okay, let's go to Psalms. So Psalms has a redemption arc, though. So if Jesus is just mentioning the first part, but all his audience is going to understand Psalms 22. So he's just like, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? But if you read it on, like he gets redeemed later on. So would be like, yes, I died, but I'm being redeemed later on. I'm going to come back. So that's like him like foreshadowing to his audience that the guards and the Romans won't understand. Is like, yes, it looks like I'm dying now, and I've heard this apologetics before, but in reality, I'm actually going to come back. So I think that's sort of what the apologetics are on why he was saying that. But and this is another thing he brought up a few times, is that true prophets are not killed according to the Bible. I think a lot of Muslims would say that too, right? That if it's a true prophet, that they can't be killed. That's why they reject that Jesus was killed. Is that correct, Isa, or no?
Can you say that one more time? I'm sorry.
Why do Muslims believe Jesus wasn't killed? Is it true that a true prophet can't be killed, or?
I mean, it's an interesting argument because it's like it is difficult because some Muslims believe in Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah. I mean, that he would kind of exist in like the extra canonical stuff. He's not mentioned in the Quran, but you do have prophets that have faced this kind of situation in the Hebrew scriptures. I would say for Muslims that probably, there's so many different kinds of Muslims. Again, it's polylythic. So this is not really a part of like a belief space per se, but I would say that it is a difficult situation. Just, I think it's very hard for Muslims to feel that a great prophet like Jesus would die in this type of way. So I think philosophically, this is the point, that he is this great, in a sense, a Messiah. Because even in the end times, Muslims believe that Jesus will be coming back. Like the Sunni tradition takes this position. And I would say probably Muslims as a whole believe that Jesus is going to have a second coming, just like Christians believe. And he's going to come back and he's going to fight the Antichrist. There's a slight variation of how that end game is going to be, but it's just this idea of Jesus dying in this way is very hard, I think, for Muslims, and I think in the Islamic theology to accept that, this very powerful figure. So in a sense, he's kind of saved from this and he rises from it and is able to kind of overcome. And I think in a sense, depending on the Muslim, but I think a lot of Muslims and Christians agree on a certain point. They believe that Jesus is from a virgin birth, that Jesus is, is the Messiah, and they believe that Jesus is raised, right? The only real difference, and I think and it's a big difference, is was Jesus crucified? And Muslims will take the position that Jesus was not crucified, except with the Ahmadiyas. The Ahmadiyas are kind of unique in this position of believing that Jesus was crucified, but survived crucifixion. And yeah, so that it's an interesting thing that Christians and Muslims are very aligned on most of the narrative, with the exception of the crucifixion.
And to stay on this topic, and I think that he was rebutted quite easily by Michael Jones, Inspiring Philosophy, with other portions of the text where Jesus does say he's going to die, right? Is that correct, Dr. J? Is like, that's your traditional stance. Like, I am going to die. He brought up his story with the Last Supper. Is that something he said at the Last Supper? Or
I can't remember if he brought up the Last Supper or not, but he did, brought up other times that Jesus seems to be talking about when he's dying, and he also brought up, the whole ascension of Christ, and basically the other guy was like, no, that's not even in the Bible. I was like, because that's what I kept trying to figure out. I'm like, wait a second, how did he go to India after he ascended to heaven? I'm trying to figure out how that worked. And he's like, well, that wasn't in there. The textual evidence, shows it's not in there. And I agree that there are definitely passages that are like in the King James that even Christians all agree aren't really in the, in the original text. There's a Trinitarian verse that pretty much everybody agrees isn't, wasn't part of the original. And there's, I think, a chapter in John maybe that's kind of everyone agreeing. But I was like, I don't remember the ascension being this, debated one. And the other guy just kind of said it. And I was like, man, if I were to debate him, I'd really want to go to town on that, because you'd have to describe why you'd even appeal to the Bible when the Bible says Jesus ascended to heaven. And then you're like, oh, well, that proves it right.
yeah. We have a question for Isa. If Muslims believe that Jesus is the Messiah of the Jews, and if Jewish prophecy predicts revival from the dead, why is the crucifixion contrary to Islamic theology?
Well, I mean, this is an interesting question, because how do Jews engage this? You have multiple, again, I take the monolithic versus polyolithic position. Not all Jews would take this position of revival from the dead. Like, if you took the Sadducees position, they didn't even believe in an afterlife. This is a big contention in the New Testament, which I think is really awesome, that we have this narrative of the New Testament, that you have this priestly class, the Sadducees or the Sadducees, who actually ask a very interesting question to Christ, where they said, well, there was this woman, she had 7 husbands who were brothers, right? And they married her. Which guy is she with at the end? And it's a good question. It sounds really simple on the surface, but it's actually a very good question, because it's challenging this idea of like a romantic narrative of the afterlife. And then Jesus basically responds to that question by saying, well, it's not like that. It's not the same. You're not just incarnating as like a human being now into this space. It's a different kind of narrative. And I would say that Jesus probably reflected a lot of what the Pharisees of Judea would have taken at that time. It's very hard and complex and difficult to explain what a revival of the dead actually means. What does that literally mean? Does this mean like a spiritual revival? Does this mean like I'm a human incarnate? Does this mean like a revival of my spirit? It could mean different kinds of things. So in that Jewish prophecy, in that understanding of the Jewish prophecy, the idea is, in a sense, Jesus is coming back, but Jesus is kind of in a different state, because he's not in our corporeal realm. He's in another realm. So in a sense, he is kind of resurrected from that realm into this realm. It's kind of complex to explain, but I think this is the kind of narrative. Jesus is not necessarily in the human corporeal realm right now, because he raised up, similar to like the Christian narrative that Jesus raised up. So I think if we're looking at the Islamic narrative, this is the kind of space. So it's not necessarily that situation. I think the crucifixion in and of itself, it's kind of the humiliation. I think that's the point, Ozian. That's the issue, is that how can Jesus be humiliated in this way? but Christians don't view it as a humiliation. So this is the complexity. This is a part of the prophecy that Jesus needs to do this through the Christology and through the Islamic narrative. It's just a different way of looking at it. And I could go deeper even to like the Islamic narrative of prophets. Muslims view prophets as being ma'sum. Ma'sum means like blameless, having no sin. To Jews and Christians, this is not a problem. That the ancient prophetic characters may have had flaws. This is not a problem for them. It's just like, yeah, this is human. Like if a Muslim hears the story about King David or the prophet David, it is so problematic to them. It's like, oh my gosh, how can you say this? This is blaspheming the prophet David to dare say that he committed adultery. To Jews and Christians, like, yeah, so what? That's the story. Great. We're human beings. We're flawed. But it's so different. It's amazing how this kind of significant difference can happen. So this is the same thing. This is a standard across the Muslim tradition, that these people are kind of unassailable. They're holy, special beings, and this cannot happen to them. So yeah, that would be the point.
Yeah, so I might have misquoted this earlier, Dr. J, but it's Mark 8:31. And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he said this plainly, and Peter took him aside, and Peter began to rebuke Jesus. And then Jesus, okay. But turning and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on things of God, but on the things of man." And calling him to the crowd with his disciples, he said to them, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me." So I don't know where that was. I probably messed that up, but
Yeah, no,
trying to talk about.
That's right. How did the guy answer that? Because it seems pretty clear that it's killed. Did he just say killed meant something different? I forget.
No, he took Son of Man to mean that he was not of man, that his father was a man.
Oh yeah, I remember that debate, but it says he would be killed, right? And how did he say? Well, he didn't really die. If Peter's like saying, "Hey, you're not going to be killed,"
he ignores it. He doesn't care about this. That's what he accepts some verses and not others.
Yeah,
it's his own theology. It's like, I mean, you can't say it's internally false unless you find a contradiction, but you can just say it's false from your worldview, right? It's like, if you're being honest, I think. But I see a lot of internal, like, I don't know, actually, like, is there an internal contradiction? Maybe we'll talk about that at the end, but I want to move on to the next prompt unless you think there's anything else important to talk about. I think we'll get to some of the other claims.
I want to say one last thing that I agree. I think it's about internal logic. So for the Ahmadiyya, I think it's internally logical, and for the Christian, it's internally logical. So that's what I would say. It's just sort of an impasse between these two different narratives.
Yeah. So then the next prompt is cultural and historical context. The impact of Jewish customs. So they brought this up. Jewish customs and historical accounts outside the Christian canon. I think we already covered some of this, but such as references to Jesus in Hindu texts that Grayson refuted already, on the interpretation of Jesus' death and alleged post-crucifixion activities. But I don't think we found any evidence that people really survived crucifixion except this one Josephus quote. So, where he was intentionally trying to stop it. So even if we take that narrative to be true, they tried to stop it and 2 of them died anyways. Maybe that's where the 4 hours came in. Those people were up for 4 hours, but supposedly Jesus was up for 6 hours before he died.
So the thing that I could add to this is that both of these claims have supernatural claims. Both the Christian and the Ahmadiyya position have supernatural claims. Jesus is a divine being as well, because Jesus actually defeats death by resurrecting. Jesus is beyond this type of element. And I would say the Ahmadiyya are making the same situation. They're saying Jesus may be a human, but he's like an Ubermensch. He's a Superman, so he can endure what other people cannot endure. So that's the kind of argument they're both using. It's a supernatural logic that's being utilized here. So I don't think it's illogical for the Ahmadiyya to take this position. They may not be seeing Jesus as being a deity, but they see Jesus as an Ubermensch. So yeah.
Yeah, they definitely see miracles going on. It's just they see a different miracle going on, and which miracle does the text seem to think happen? I guess that's maybe where we disagree. But there's definitely miracles going on for everybody.
100% agree.
I just want to point out to anybody watching, like when I was watching the debate, these are like all the notes I took from the debate, like so. Like to prepare for the after show, if anybody's considering super chatting or anything. But okay, good. So cultural, so like, yeah, I don't like know what more there is to talk about that. Like they talked about the herbal stuff. Did they? But is the Christian interpretation they like did some type of preservation?
It's usually like the smell of it or whatever, they put different things on them. I mean, it wouldn't be that weird to have some sort of burial thing where you put the novel thing would be like, well, this is medical and it was going to save his life. Right? They had to turn to that. For the Christians, we almost don't care why they did it, right? Is it because of the smell? Is it because of embalming? Whatever. It doesn't matter, or that doesn't matter too much. Many options are good with us.
I got paid for my super chats I sent in. Thank you. But,
I'll support you, buddy. I'll support you, bro.
And that's what Dr. J was mentioning. Is that was what Tahir was bringing up? It's like he was claiming, well, no, those were actually that was medicine. That wasn't to get rid of the smell. And it's like, and then he's like, well, they didn't do a embalming. The Jewish never had any embalming traditions, but. Like you said, it's just to get rid of the odor while the body rots. It wasn't embalming.
Whatever that medicine was, I need some. I'm just going to tell you that right now.
I think that we're using magical thinking in general. This is like with faith. There's going to be a little bit of magical thinking, and I think that's the point that what Dr. J and I totally agree on. It's like which part of the magical thinking is accurate here. Did Jesus resurrect, or was Jesus magically healed by like this magical healing substance because he's actually a Superman? Like which is it? We don't know,
Right.
And at that point, if you're just going to invoke, well, God magically healed him, you could just say, look, God magically made it so no matter what they did to him on the cross, he was never going to die. They could have ripped every limb off and God could have put his head back on and somehow he would have not died. Whatever, right? Like, so if the healing's miraculous, I don't even know why he needs the swoon theory. He could just say God kept him alive miraculously, no matter what crazy type of.
That would be even easier, and I wouldn't have a problem with that. But the swoon thing, it becomes too complicated to me even as an idiot. It's easier to say like, hey, like this miracle that he died and came back to life. It has this magical sense to it.
The swoon theory
that you're telling me sounds crazy.
The swoon theory makes way more sense if you're trying to say, I don't believe in miracles, but I think Jesus, did die and it seemed like he rose again and people were convinced by something. And I think that is a historical act, and I'm just trying to be able to explain it. So it fits way better for an atheist to me than
I agree.
Than a theist.
Well,
yes.
In my view, 100%. If Jesus was crucified, he was just hung up with rope, tied off to the crucifix, and it wasn't really normally a cross, right? Usually it was just a pole.
Like a pole,
just tied off and hung there until they thought he was dead, and they took him and they discarded his body. And if he was magically not dead, people went to go, if they saw him, they went to go get his body because he was appreciated by groups of people and they could try to tend him, and maybe he didn't die, like, because there is a potentially you won't die. And if they don't do a test to verify you dead, because it depends how many people they're crucifying, I guess, if they need the pole for somebody else. But they didn't really care because poles were pretty cheap. Just put another pole in, hang another person out. Like,
I think that's a really valid point. The point that you just made, that like in ancient times they didn't really know if people died or not. Like it just was very archaic and crude. They had a very archaic and crude, like even like with hangings and stuff. There were people who survived hangings, and there are people who kind of like they buried people alive because they thought they were dead, and they didn't know. Like I mean, because science is just so different. We don't know for sure on this, but like in the narrative, it does seem pretty brutal, like what happened. Unlike like a hanging or something, it's a pretty brutal situation. Like according to the Passion narrative, which
Mhm.
our good friend Mel Gibson recreated for us on the Passion of the Christ, with you have the scourging, because you have a lot of stuff. Like if that narrative is true, if we grant that narrative to be true, there was a scourging, there's a crown of thorns, so there would have been infection, there's a lot of different things. There's probably a lot of trauma just from the scourging, even of itself, from like the whipping and all that stuff. Then you have the crucifixion, um, where he's carrying the cross until Simon of Cyrene gets the cross. So he's already from all this damage, according to this narrative. Then he gets crucified, and not only does he get crucified, he gets stabbed by a spear. So I'm just like, it's a pretty brutal. If we're granting that the Passion narrative occurred, surviving that, if he's a normal human, yeah, it doesn't seem very likely.
Oz, I understand that you laid out like the argument for how it is a possibility, but don't you think it's like infinitely more likely that it goes, they took this guy, they beat him up, they tortured him a
Yes.
lot, they put him up on the pole and he died, and that's the end of the story? Like
It's more plausible. Yeah.
just like everyone else.
why would I?
Sure.
No, they didn't normally like put a crown of thorns on the person. That was
No,
because
that's
of the
just
whole
from this
God
narrative.
claim.
If we're granting
Yeah.
that the Passion narrative is true, we're just
Yeah.
granting that this premise is true. If that occurred,
Just said
the
he was
scourging,
crucified.
yeah, and all of it, all of the whole narrative occurred, yeah, it doesn't seem like you're going to survive all of that.
No,
Like,
I would just
And
say
then
the
he
only
died,
the
and
only
that's
part
it.
of the narrative, but Dr. J was bringing it out from an atheistic natural standpoint. I wouldn't accept that if he did survive, none of the other stuff happened. So
yeah,
like, that's the point I was trying to make.
and I think Dr. J makes a really good argument. Dr. J said,
Yeah.
yeah, why do you need this magical thing of like medicine and healing? Why create this story of trying to make it sound scientific? Why not just take the magical route? Just
You
go and
want it?
say he's a superhuman and go with that. Because we
You
don't
want-
have a medicine that heals crucifixion. Damn it!
You want
We don't
another
have
cool stat? You
Mhm.
know, they started building relationships between Rome and India. It's like first started relationships around when Jesus was alive.
That is cool. But I definitely think that there was probably, I definitely think South Asian mysticism probably affected ancient Jewry. I don't think there's any problem with that. It just did all these, like there's the Notovich Chronicles where they said Jesus came to India in the Buddhist text. I'm like, okay, maybe.
So
I
it's
don't know, maybe they're
possible
less serious.
Jesus survived and went to India.
I mean, it sounds very much like, like when you have like movies and you have like fan fiction where you don't want your character to die, you do like all of
Get it?
this work to make your character survive and live, and you're like, like you have a movie and your character dies in the movie and it makes this huge impact, and then people are like, no, I didn't want that person to die. Okay, I'm making another movie and I'm going to tell a story about how, actually magically this character survived through all of the stuff and he made it through, or she made it through, and it's just like,
I
Iron
was
Charitor, I think those will be long questions, but we will get to them before we close out. I have two more prompts.
I was
so-
thinking about that
one
exact
more.
same thing of when you're building a story, and I was thinking all across through literature, cinema, theater, and those kinds of things, where some things you had this idea before, and maybe now you don't like it anymore because it's a different
Oh, you already know.
situation, a different world, and you retcon everything. I was kind of thinking about that, like across all of the human things we've seen with creation, myths, all of those stories that we tell. They all kind of behave a little bit the same.
I think we have more historical documentation for the Jesus story, that at least Jesus existing. We have a lot. We have I counted 8 secondary accounts during that whole debate. This Hindu scripture that it sounds like is fake. The Bible, which I don't think is a good source. The Quran, I don't think is a good source. And then there's the Talmud, which is a very weak source. And then there's 2 historical claims that we're not sure about the historicity. We're not sure if those claims are valid or not, or if they were changed later on. But at least we have 2 historical accounts, right, of Jesus existing.
Mhm.
Right. But so which is different from like Hercules. Like there's no historical accounts of Hercules.
Right.
It's all mythology. Or at least we have now maybe the sources are fake, but we have a couple sources.
Well, and the difficulty too is you're dealing with Hercules or Hercules is much earlier on too. So like even our documentation of sourcing is very different. Even like
Sure.
there's an argument about like Caesar crossing the Rubicon. Like what are the sources? It's just hard because 2,000 years you're going to have more information than if you have 3,000 years or 4,000 years ago. Same thing. Like if you're going 1,500 years, you're going to have better information than what you would have from 2,000 years ago. That's just the way that these things work, and it's difficult. It's murky, and you do the best you can. You do with whatever's the most plausible.
Yeah. So like they kept there's tension also with scholarly consensus versus the alternative theory that he went to India and all this other stuff. And they kept on like, well, you're just appealing to authority. But I mean, it's not a fallacy if it is an actual authority, but you are actually competing against theory. So it's like, there's a little tension there. Like, so you have to be able to overcome that scholarly consensus and provide some type of justification if you want to convince me that all these scholars are wrong and you somehow have the truth. And I think he built like a compelling argument. It just, I don't know what you guys think. I'll just go
Yeah,
around.
it was
What do you think?
compelling, but it just didn't like bring it home, if that makes any sense. I don't know. It's not convincing because when you, one thing I notice is you have to cherry pick because then the Bible says in other places that Jesus died in the cross. So, and like flat out, no metaphors, no.
Well,
So
scholarly consensus is like Jesus died and was crucified. But like all the other claims that he came back to life is not necessarily that's sort of a Christian consensus that he
yes,
resurrected. So, but the scholars will say Jesus basically existed. He did these things. He died. He was crucified. Like as an historical account, and people can reject that. They could be mythicists because it is 2,000-year-old knowledge, but there is a lot of scholarly work. Bart Ehrman, and he was an atheist, very famously will accept a lot of these claims. Apologia, people following him, he thinks the accounts are good enough to accept that he was crucified and died on the crucifix.
Yeah, in my opinion, just follow Bart Ehrman. If you want to know what that view's like and the scholarly consensus on it, you just read Bart Ehrman's books and listen to what he says. And you know what Apologia says, in my opinion, mostly is just piggybacking on Bart Ehrman. Bart Ehrman does the real work. He's the guy actually reading all the original text. He's the guy grinding it out, and he's actually halfway decent talking, and he can speak publicly, and he's understandable. So he is, to me, is a really good bridge who is the real guy who does all the real work, and he actually will talk in front of people. I think sometimes you do need science communicators or scholarly communicators because the scholars are so bad at talking and communicating, but not Bart Ehrman. Bart Ehrman can do it, in my opinion, unless maybe I'm just so familiar with the subjects that I could follow anybody. I don't know, but I feel like Bart Ehrman's really good.
yes, I love him too.
So we got a bunch of questions for Issa. I want to do one at a time. I want to do one, and then we're going to go around with some like our final thoughts, and then we'll do the other 2 questions. So the first one is from Iron Charter for Issa. Do you think that aesthetics, I think it is, played a big role.
Aestheticism.
Yeah, thank you. In developing all these religions, including Islam? And why would something man-made be regarded as divine and not just brain spasms? It sounds a little insulting, but go ahead.
Yeah, Iron Charioteer asked a lot of questions. I think they asked all 3 questions. So, engaging this, yes, asceticism is a big part. Take Tasawwuf, Sufism, completely ascetic tradition. Early church fathers are ascetic as well. You have the Kabbalists. There's a degree of asceticism in that space too. So I think in ancient traditions, asceticism is a big, big deal, and it's very, very important. What can I see the other parts of the question? I just want to make sure I address all of it.
I think I deleted it.
Yeah, I saw it. I was reading it. He was asking about the problem.
I moved it way up. Oh, that's the next question.
Yeah, the
The
next
next question is, how does Islam solve the problem of evil?
Right. Yeah, I saw that too. But yeah, the first question about the asceticism, and then they were asking like, is it brain spasms? Is it stuff like that? That was, I think, a part of the question.
He's asking, how do you know it's not a delusion or whatever?
Well, I mean, the thing is with faith, it's not like there's some like concrete way of engaging this. It's faith. It's like really, it's a different kind of spectrum of thought. If one could argue it could be a delusion, but for those folks, it's a very important thing. It means a lot for folks, and yeah, I think it helps them connect to a higher power, and yeah, and I think they're definitely interconnected. These faith traditions are definitely interconnected, and it's very important for them. And I wish I knew the rest of it. Let's see if I can find it.
Last one. That was it for that one, I think.
Oh no, and it said,
I
I found the question. It said, and why would something man-made be regarded as divine and not just brain spasms? I wanted to answer that part of it. So I agree that it's a big role. That's number one. Number two is, and would something be man-made? Well, we don't know. I mean, is humanity connected with the divine in this conversation? It's a possibility. Can it be regarded as divine? I mean, it could be, and could it be it could be both. Yes, and you know, and do you want me to answer that other question or after we do final thoughts?
We'll do final,
and then I'll answer the last questions.
We'll do audience interactions next.
Cool.
So, conclusion and personal reflections, and we covered a lot of this stuff. So, if you want to just summarize the debate outcome, like who you thought won the debate, maybe reflecting on each provided their arguments and counter arguments, and I thought they did well, but anyways, and your personal stance. You want to start off, Max?
Yes. I think Mike won the debate, but that's mainly based on I was already decided from the start on what the answer was on this, because I had kind of seen a little bit of this thing, not in so much detail, not with all the objections that Tahir, am I right, brought to the table. Those were interesting. Some of them I had to go and look up and think, well, like the thing with the birds, but it was a nice debate. I had a lot of fun. It's always entertaining for me to see theologies going into like the neat and grit of the theology, because looking at it from outside, I learn a lot about what they think, and it's always entertaining for some reason to me. So I enjoyed it, and Mike took the one today.
And the next time you hear it, it'll be more familiar. Maybe his argument will make more sense. But go to you, Dr. Jade. Issa had a lot to say. But
Thought it was a great debate. I thought they both did good. I think the Islamic position, I'm sure I keep calling it Islamic because I keep forgetting the name of the specific belief. But I thought he had a tough road to hoe, and I thought he did a fantastic job. I don't know how, what I would have expected to be better. I think he did super good. So I really enjoyed it. I like these kind of things. It's like, is this better than Flat Earth? I don't know. It's better for me because I know more about it. So maybe that's the only reason it's better for me.
We get more viewers for flat Earth debates. That's all
true.
I know on our
Maybe
channel.
I need to root for flat Earth. I guess.
On modern day debate, they do good, but when they come here, they want to hear the flat Earth stuff. So whatever.
Yeah. So I thought it was great. I thought it was enjoyable. And I really enjoyed a more specific topic. I know that modern day debate doesn't like that sometimes, but I thought they did just a good job. And I know that they went off into theology a little bit, but 80% of the time they did do well on sticking to the topic. And I think that is nice because sometimes these things just go all over the place. And anyway, I thought it was great.
Hey, Itza, who do you think won? What were your thoughts?
It's hard to say who won. Because I don't know how you can win in this conversation. It's just two different theories and thoughts on this narrative. I think people are already kind of decided on this. I think the goal of this debate is to kind of showcase that there is an alternative narrative with the Ahmadiyya narrative, which I think is cool. I don't know. I think they both did fantastic. I agree with everyone on the panel on that. That's what I think. I think it was just a pretty interesting conversation. I think whatever people already believed, they already believed by the end of it. I do feel kind of sad because I said something in Urdu to Tariq, or what's his name?
Here.
Tahir?
Tahir, yeah, not Tariq. It's Tahir. Thank you, Tahir Nasser or Nasir. Tahir, I said "Kaise ho," which means like "How are you?" but of course, James didn't. I should have thought about it. I'm like, James won't know what this means, so I was like, yeah, I lost that super chat on that, but that's fine. My second part, inspiring philosophy, heard that, so that was funny. But overall, I think the debate was really cool. I think it's really awesome to showcase alternative ideas and alternative narratives in this space. And I think it was just a really interesting conversation. So I think we won. I think we, the audience, won because we got to hear such a cool conversation. So that's where I stand.
I got a super chat. We'll get to you super chat, shaking back eating in a moment. I think it's my turn. So I actually wrote something up because I'm weird. So to me personally, I think there was a lot more tension with Tahir's argument within the New Testament. I think we talked about that a little bit, and that Michael Jones' New Testament is more harmonious. Like it fits together. Like you don't have to have these weird different type of interpretations that you just entirely reject the normative interpretation just to fit your own narrative. It may be consistent within your own view, but if I'm looking at just the New Testament alone, I think there was more like problems with Tahir's argument using that than with Michael Jones. But Tahir has a specific theology that doesn't seem to have any contradictions in it that I could find. So even though he was appealing to the New Testament, it didn't seem like there was any real internal inconsistencies. So in that regard, I think he did well. So I would say it's a tie, and I'm unconvinced. I actually think it's more likely that Jesus died, but if he didn't die, then it was because if he was alive after crucifixion, it would be because he didn't die. So the most likely he died. The second most likely, he didn't die. The least likely would be he died and was resurrected. So, like, if I had to pick between the two, based on the arguments that were presented, my argument's the best. So, atheist won, and the second one that was the best was, I believe, Tahir's. But because I think they were both internally consistent, I would just have to give them a tie.
Ozian, this is one time you could give the Christians a win. Come on, just jump on board with us tonight. Come on, buddy.
I gave you a tie after the atheist. No,
but brother, the atheist wasn't in the debate, so we have to choose of those two, right?
Yeah, I know. So I chose a tie. Sorry, but I think if you look at the panel, that you guys all, except Max wasn't here, You both voted. We all three voted for inspiring philosophy to win. I think I did, at least. I took a note that said we all did, so we can't take takesy backsies. So in that regard, you two were right and I was wrong. So we're like we. So that means that it shifted towards Tahir. So he won. Just kidding. That's not how that works.
I wasn't on stage in the
No.
pre-show, but I was watching you guys. I was still at work.
No, I think it was a tie. So I'm going to do the super chat first. Taking back Eden, flat earther. If the sun came, would people want to kill him? No, I wouldn't ever want to kill anybody. No. Would there be people that want to? Yeah, half the world, because half of them would think that they're like the Antichrist returned. The other half would think like it's the Messiah. It depends on who you ask, right?
I think my question would be, I'm like, if this is a supernatural being, do you even have the capability of killing this person? I think that's such a weird thing. If you're not utilizing the thought, I'm like, you're assuming this person. It's like, because there's a movie called Akira, right? It's a really great anime. It's like old school anime. But in this movie, there's this guy, his name's Tetsuo. He's like, he gets like basically empowered by psychic powers. And basically all the people try to shoot guns at him and he just destroys them all. If this person is the son of God and it has the power, what can a human being do with a gun or a machine gun or a rocket launcher? You're not going to do anything to this guy. He's going to tear you apart, you know?
Would you try if they were like the Antichrist trying to kill him?
I would think I would be smart because I'd be like, dude, if I try to kill this being, they're going to kill me easily. They're going to snap their finger and I'm going to be torn apart, right? Like, come on now. Like, these people have never really thought this through, you know?
What the story is an Antichrist in Christ returns.
Right, but the Antichrist will only be defeated by the Christ. The Antichrist is going to dominate and defeat everyone else.
So you're going to pick a side, right? And if you lose, you knew you were on the wrong side.
Okay. Yeah,
like,
I hear that.
Yeah, so like, because it's supposed to be Antichrist is supposed to be the super influential, inspiring person that convinces all these people that he's the Christ, but he's really not.
I'm gonna let you guys solve this. I gotta go. I am supposed to go to a basketball game to watch some high schoolers beat up on each other. So see you guys later.
Cool.
Take care, Dr. J.
I love basketball too, brother. If we meet sometime, we can play, man.
Thank you, Dr. J. And these are for Issa.
I'd love to engage this.
How do you solve the problem of evil as a Muslim? Like, or maybe not you particular, but Islam in general.
Yeah, what's the argument for this? I think it's interesting because this is the funny thing. Again, there was a debater who tried to attack Judaism, and I'm like, brother, you cannot attack Judaism if you want to defend Islam. It does not work. It doesn't work for anyone who does it. Christians can't attack Judaism, and Muslims can't attack Judaism.
Well, I think they're not religious based on these questions.
No, I'm not talking about this particular person. I'm just saying in general. My point that I was going to make is that I was going to say that you have the same kind of Jewish narrative. You're going to utilize the Muslims are going to use the Jewish narrative to engage this point, and the Jewish narrative basically is, it's a trial of God. The issue of why these things exist is it's a part of having free will and of being like of testing the metal of being a good human. You need evil to see if you can actually be good. It's a trial, and I think that's the position. If you don't have evil, then how can you have good? The only way that you can have evil is if you have good. You won't recognize good without evil. And that's the thing. In the Jewish thought, there's this idea called the ergodi rai, and it's this idea that with like the rai, it's this idea that to make this kind of bread, you need to have this idea that there has to be a parallel. You can't recognize the good without the evil, and you won't recognize the evil without the good. You need to have the dual.
Do you need gratuitous evil to recognize evil?
So this is the question. Like, And this is the hardship with good and evil. It's like one person's good may be another person's evil, another person's evil may be another person's good.
But gratuitous evil, do we need gratuitous?
And if we're gonna, I'm gonna assume what you mean by that, if that's just correct. When you mean by gratuitous evil, like genocide and mass
Yeah.
slaughter, mass killing, yeah. For me, in my philosophical position, I believe in pacifism. I believe in peace. I don't believe in war. I don't believe in killing. So this is my ideological stance. It's probably considered leftist, but I don't think we should have it at all. We don't need it. We don't need those things. But
Well,
um,
then God can't exist. If God is good and God allowed for gratuitous evil, like a Holocaust,
right.
how is that a good being?
Well, Stephen Fry talked about this too, like bone marrow and like bone cancer and all this stuff, which is really really horrendous. The thing I'm gonna try to go into this position because you probably all three of us are going to agree on what we think is generally good and evil. I think we're probably going to be pretty much in agreement on what those things are. But the idea of this situation is even like viruses and stuff. This type of thing this is in God's eye. This is not in human's eye. So we might view it as gratuitous as a human, but God knows better than us.
Well, then there's
I'm
no
just
such
trying to
thing
go
as
into arguments. Huh?
then there's no such thing as evil. If God is good and all this
Right.
stuff that we believe is evil is not actually evil. But we're supposed to be created by God to know good from evil. So how could
Right.
we know this is evil? God created it, and God not be responsible. If God's
Sure.
responsible, God can't be good. Like not at least
Okay.
not. So you could argue we need some tension to be able to develop our
Sure.
souls or whatever you want to
Sure.
claim it is. But why do we need
Sure.
to put even the possibility in people's heads to want to harm children?
Yeah.
Why can't God make us where we don't want to harm children?
Okay, so I'm gonna try to so obviously this is not my particular position. I'm not seated in this, but I'm gonna be kind of like a lawyer and I'm gonna try to take the counterpoint on this position because that's what you're asking. So if I'm going to take the counterpoint of this position, the thing is man's thought and God's thought or human's thought and God's thought are on two different paradigms. So the thing is God has all of this knowledge and wisdom. And for example, the Quran has a story of this where there is a person who's called the guide, and the Muslims consider him as he's called Khidr in the like the Islamic tradition, and Khidr means the green man, and he meets with Moses, the prophet Moses, in this story, and they go on this journey, and it's actually retold in the Circle of Iron. It's a really cool like '80s movie that you should watch. It's got another. It's a David Carradine vehicle, so you'll see David Carradine in that, but it's a kind of a retelling of the same story. So they go on this adventure, and Kidder has this secret esoteric knowledge and wisdom that Moses doesn't have. Because Moses asks God, he's like, is there someone who has like, how can I learn like the truth and the wisdom? And then God says, here, I'm going to send you this person who has higher wisdom than you. And Kidder has this like high level wisdom, and Kidder and Moses go on this like kind of like master disciple journey. And Kidder says, the promise that you need to make me is that you will not question anything I do or say. Can you do that? And Moses says, yeah, sure, why not? So they go on this quest. And on the first part of the quest, they meet this boy who looks kind of beautiful and he's like talking a lot. And then Kidder kills the boy. And Moses is like, what is going on? You can't just kill this person. What about their family? What's going on? Kidder said, what did I tell you? You can't question what I'm doing, right? And then Moses said, fine, okay, whatever. I'll just go with it. Then they go on to the second part of the journey. And they, let's see, I'm trying to remember what exactly happens. But basically, another kind of a strange occurrence happens where they go into this village and the people treat them really, really badly. And then Kidder rebuilds this well. And they're like, well, what's going on? What's happening? Why are Moses like, what's happening? What's going on? What are you doing? Oh, no. Sorry, there's one more part I forgot, and it just came to me. So the second part of the journey is they come to this boat. They come on this boat, They ask the captain to like the captain's really kind to them and helps them, and they go on this boat. And then when Kidder, when they arrive to like their destination, Kidder destroys the boat. Like he puts like a hole in the boat and he damages the boat. And Moses is like, why did you damage this boat? This guy was so kind and he was so nice to us. Why would you do that? And Kidder said, what did I tell you? Don't question what I'm doing. Then they go on to the third part of the journey, and that's the part where he rebuilds the well. And Moses is like, oh my God, I can't deal with this. What's going on here? Tell me what's happening. And then basically, this is the part where Kidder and Moses split. And Kidder says, I will tell you about everything that happens, but we're going to end our journey now because you've questioned these things. So then Kidder tells Moses the first part, the prophet Moses, about peace of blessing, said that with the boy was this really awful boy that was going to, in the future, was going to destroy and do all of these horrible, bad things, right? And that's why he had to be put to death, and his parents will get another child who is better. So that's the explanation for the first story. The second part is that boat was going to be commandeered by thugs who are in the area, or by a king who's commandeering all. It was the king, I think, a king who's going to commandeer all the ships. So him damaging the boat saved the boat from being taken by this king and stolen by this king. So the man could still have his livelihood. So there was actually a deeper wisdom in the future. And then the third one was when they rebuilt the well actually protected these treasures of orphans that were in this well. And if the well got more damaged, the evil people of the village would have stolen the treasures. So the point is that God's understanding is higher than the human understanding. And you'll see this a lot in Sufi literature, like Hoja Nasruddin and stuff. Nasruddin, you'll see the same kind of stuff. So that's the kind of idea with this problem of evil. I told this really long story in a couple minutes. That's funny. What happens in this story is that God's wisdom is higher. So you may not understand something. Maybe this Holocaust that happened killed millions of people, but that those millions of people who were killed in the future would save, billions of people. And I know you could make the counter like, well, God is all powerful, all knowing, and all understanding. Why even have this? Why have this kind of chicanery? But the thing is that maybe that's the way that God's mechanisms need to work, because that then will instill this higher wisdom that these people would not get without the journey. But that's the explanation.
How can it do that if it's sometime in the future? I might not even be around. And then how can I know what's good and evil? If I know something's evil, I'm wrong. Then I don't know what is good and evil. So that can't be. We can't have it both ways. Either we know what's good and evil, or we don't. And if we already know what's good and evil, why do we need evil? We would be able to fix the broken car, as somebody pointed out a minute ago, even if the car never breaks, it, because we know how to fix a broken car, because God put it in our heart. We know how to fix it. We don't need a broken car. But we know how to fix it, even though we'll never have to fix it. Like, that could be given to us. We don't need a lesson to be able to know the lesson. I can teach my kids lessons of morality without causing suffering. I can teach them. Children are born with empathy. Most of them are, not all, but most of them are. We talked about this before. So like for psychopaths and shit, it doesn't matter what you tell them. Any story you tell them, they're going to either get away with the rule breaking if they can, or not, because it's just the way they're hardwired.
And I totally hear you. I'm just saying I'm trying to give you the counterpoint of the understanding. You may not be convinced of it, but I'm saying that the idea is it's a wisdom teaching, and this is a part of God's kind of higher understanding of things.
I agree, but wisdom teaching can be done through story. It doesn't have to be done through reality.
Right, so and I mean that was a story.
It doesn't make any sense. It was a story, but that's not the question. We're asking for the thing that actually happens in reality, like gratuitous evil. Like, why
does the Holocaust exist? Yeah, I mean,
or no, even this. Why are we built with the motivation? Why are some people wired with the motivation to want to harm children? Why couldn't we be created to not ever desire to harm children? We can do all other types of evil. Just take away that one, like the one we consider like the most reprehensible when it comes to individual action. Take away that one. Why do we need that to understand something's bad?
I get that.
We have all the other lessons.
I totally get that. And I think it's just the question is how do we view what God is? So like the deists wouldn't have this position. Like they wouldn't have this problem because the
because
deists
they don't have a
just see,
good God.
yeah, God is just a prime mover and that's it. God
And
just moves it. Yeah.
And Dr. J doesn't have this argument because he thinks God isn't perfectly good.
Yeah.
So it's not attention for him.
And this is a difficulty. It is a difficult if you're saying God is perfectly good to, and that's the point, that really the only counter argument is the one that I brought, is that God may be perfectly good. We just don't, maybe we as humans don't know what perfectly good is, but God knows what perfectly good is. And, maybe if we're connected to God, we can understand. That's the idea of the story of Kidder, is that Kidder is connected to God the way that humans aren't connected to God. So he then has this special knowledge, esoteric knowledge that we do not have. So yeah, I mean, I don't think this is a solvable case, but I think it's a fair
I
case.
think it.
No, it kind of brings in a lot of other things, like the whole idea of pre-crime, and then, okay, did that boy that was going to become a horrible person, did he really have free will, or was it already predestined that he was going to be that? At any point, could he have chosen not to do whatever he was set to have been going to do?
I think that's a very
So
good question. The
it
point is,
opens a lot of more
it
problems, at
challenges
least
the
to
idea
me.
of free will. Yeah, and I think that's the point. It probably does. It does challenge that concept of free will. That it's more of a, and I would say Islam, in a sense, actually really doesn't fully believe in free will because it believes in the concept of the Lahul Mahfuz, which is the divinely preserved tablet, which already has all the knowledge and information from all time. So, I mean, that's a, yeah, the challenge of free will is there too. It's interesting. Matt and I actually discussed this concept of free will.
Not only the challenge on free will, but on the idea that, do you deserve punishment for something you haven't done yet? Is that fair?
Well, why does fairness have to matter? It's God. Why does he have to be fair? Anyways.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Yeah,
The thing is, it's fairness to God. It's not necessarily fairness to humanity. I think that's really the only argument we could say, is that God has a different standard than humans do, and we don't understand that standard, and thus it is the way it is. I think that's the best theological argument that I think we can bring for it.
But then that clashes with the omni thing. Like, isn't he omnibenevolent?
Well,
omnibenevolent to God's standard. It does fit that narrative. If you're saying God is omnibenevolent according to God's goodness, we as humans don't know what really truly is good, but God knows what's all good. Do you get what I'm trying to say? That's the argument.
Yeah, but I don't know. The thing is that clashes with, if I can be what I see as better, why can't God be better than even my ideal thought of what goodness could be?
I completely understand your argument. I'm just saying that if we're looking at the argument, the idea is that we may think we know better, but God knows better. Do you get what I'm trying to say? That is the argument that the theist is going to utilize.
God's wrong.
Doesn't work.
I do want to say that.
God,
I mean,
wrong.
I hear that, but but you get what I'm saying. If we're taking the theist position, that we have to grant that position. So,
well, that's why I just say, well, your God's evil, because but I'm driving the audience away now because I'm talking like an atheist. See the number going down.
And I don't know what you think, but there's also a point somewhere around this neck of the woods of the God of the Old Testament being a whole different character than the God of the New Testament.
That's correct. You have the Doetists and the Modalists. That's exactly the problem. That's where the Gnostics, why a lot of Trinitarians hate Gnostics, is because that's the Gnostic argument. Yeah.
I do want to close it out. We've been going for 2 hours.
Do you want me to answer the other questions though? Like quickly, like because Iron Charioteer asked like 5 questions. I can try to give
4 more.
I can give like 1 sentence
really
answers
quick.
for each of them. Okay.
Who created Iblis, the adversary?
Okay.
No more questions unless it's a super chat.
Okay. Yeah, I would say that obviously it's, according to the Islamic story, it's God. Allah would have created Iblis or Shaitan,
Okay. Islam is built on the demiurges of the fallen archons of the Pleroma. I don't know what that means.
I have no idea.
You know what that means?
Well, the demiurge is supposed to be like this supernatural force. It's like I think if someone asks these questions, they shouldn't.
Sounds like a Gnostic question.
You're putting all these fancy terms. You should explain what you mean because you're assuming that people know.
It's a Gnostic. It's a Gnostic question because the next one is: are there any Gnostic doctrines in the Quran?
I think it really depends on the Muslim you ask. Some might take that position of Gnosticism. Yeah, and the demiurge is that idea of like in the ancient Christian things and Gnostic things that the demiurge, it was the same kind of dualistic thing that we see in Zoroastrian of Ahriman and Ahura Mazda. So yeah, it's possible. It just depends on what Muslim you ask. See, I
Yeah,
think I
the
answered those pretty quickly.
Pleroma by giving birth to a highly flawed being, the demiurge.
Yeah.
I've heard some of this stuff. It's
Yeah,
you know,
and
it's
that's the
take
thing. That's the point that Max is talking about. The demiurge was like the bad god, and now Christ is the good god. Yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
and
I'll
I
just
can answer this question.
yeah.
Okay,
go
I'm
ahead.
surprised that you don't know the answer to this question. The thing is,
Well,
it's
say the
not
question so people that are listening.
sure.
Uh,
Oh yeah, we're doing a podcast too. So the question is, why does the Quran chapters or the surah get shorter as the book gets longer? Did Allah run out of things to say? Serious question, not trolling. Um, the thing is, it's actually the organization of the Quran. So you have the Medinan surahs and you have the Meccan surahs. So the Meccan surahs are in the last. It's not. It's not organized by revelation. So the first surah Al-Fatiha, which is actually pretty short, and then Surah Al-Baqarah and Surah Al-Imran are they're not revealed in the order that they came in Revelation. They're organized kind of in a thematic space. So yeah, this will probably take a whole long thing. So I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible. So the shorter surahs in the last like juz, the juz are chapters or his is they are Meccan surahs. So the revelations you have the Meccan era and the Medinan era, and so like a lot of the longer surahs are from the Medinan era, where when the Prophet of Islam was in Medina versus when the Prophet of Islam was in Mecca. So those surahs that are very short at the end are Meccan surahs, and they have that kind of thematic element of being in the kind of the Meccan era. So sorry, if we had like an hour, I could go deeper into this point, but that's like a 1 minute answer or a couple minute answer for that question.
and that's it. Unless I think that's it. We can do closings. We can just do closeouts. So if you want to go first, Max.
Yes, I love the debate today. Loved having you, everyone around. Stay tuned. We have Ocean coming up with a new debate on Wednesday, right? It's Wednesday, correct?
Oh no, in 2 days.
Sorry, Sunday.
Sunday, yeah.
Mind, brain fart. I'm sorry.
I don't know if we'll have a show tomorrow. We might. I'm going to look to see. I think there's a debate somewhere. I might post a pre-show and an after-show for us. So stay tuned. It might be. No. That's on the 15th. I take it back. So MC Tune is going to be debating on modern day debate on the 15th. That'll be good fun to see.
Oh, that's nice. Do you know the opponent?
Yeah, he told me. I can't remember, but
Okay.
we'll schedule that. People will see it. But yeah,
Woo-hoo.
and then that's all we really have scheduled right now. You'll see some stuff come out. And then you have your show next week on the 7th.
Next Wednesday, 9 p.m., unless there's a debate and we have to move it like we did this week. But we're going to talk about the love stories of two caliphs. It's going to be fun.
What do you want to say there to close it out, Issa?
Well, peace and blessings all. It's great to always be here, and I feel honored to be among such great sages here. I think I'm really happy that we can have these conversations. I'm so happy that we can have these like really sort of epic dialogues on just life in general, who we are as humans and where we're going and what we believe. I think it's so important and it's so nurturing to have that space. I think this was a really powerful and interesting discussion about, something that's very important for a lot of people. And I'm glad that even people who don't necessarily subscribe or even care about that particular ideology of, this a particular protagonist and what happened with them, we can have an interesting discussion about what that means in our relationship to humanity. And I think these cosmological, epistemological questions are necessary and help us thrive as humans. So that's what all I think. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, we had Christian, a Muslim, and atheist all on stage. Even if some Muslims don't consider you a true Muslim, they can pound stand.
And I'm also
One
a
of the-
Jew too, so there you go. That may make it harder too.
There we
so.
go. Now we're 4. But one of the first comments, like I saw in the live chat before this debate even started, was an attack against Tahir. It's like disgusting. Like basically calling for his execution if he was in one of those countries that do it for that thing. It's like, how gross do you have to be to want that just because somebody has a different religious belief than you do? I just find it sad. But on that sad note, on a positive note, hey, our channel's growing. We have like 207 channel members behind the scenes, but it's all paid with Argentina pesos. Anyway, so that's okay. We're doing pretty good. We've been monetized for a month now. Our subs are still growing. I love what's going on. If you like what you saw today, please give us a like. Share this content out. We get a lot of shares. I really appreciate the number of shares people provide for a channel. Thank you so much. And leave comments in the comments. Let us know what you think about the show. And if you like it, the channel membership's only 99 cents a month. Just 99 cents. That's US dollars, 99 cents. If you're in another country, it could be less or more. Trust me. If it's Argentina pesos, it's like 6 cents for a month. Whatever. 6 American cents. But I don't know what it is in their currency. With that, I'm going to close it out, guys. Thank you so much for watching and staying tuned with us. And we'll be back in maybe tomorrow, but at least in 2 days. And I'll talk to y'all later. Bye-bye.